Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Code Club. In today's episode, we are going to be digging into some election data. Yes, I know, it's been about 2 months, and that just doesn't seem like far enough in the past, does it? Well, anyway, elections, politics, brings us lots of really interesting data. It's something that we can all relate to. It's something that we all have some kind of stock in and is important to us. Obviously, I live in Michigan in the United States of America. We have a very peculiar election system that is largely state-based. It's also based on the size of that state. So a state like, say, Wyoming has a large geographic area, but only gets 3 votes, whereas a state like Michigan, which is smaller, but has a lot more people, I think has something like 12 or 13 votes, whereas other states like New York or California are gigantic, and have far more electoral votes than even Michigan does. Of course, then this creates unique situations where states like California and New York are highly Democratic. States like Texas are largely Republican. So our candidates for president tend not to actually campaign in those states, although I think they go to those states to get money. Anyway, what they focus on are what are called the battleground states, like Michigan, because my state is more evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. And so once they've kind of figured out what states are safely Republican, safely Democrat, it gets them down to about 7 or 8 different states that are more evenly balanced. And these are called the battleground states. All right, that's enough background. And what I'm going to focus on is the polling and electoral results for those states. So Nate Silver is the founder of the former website 538.com, which I used to be a fan of. He now has a Substack newsletter called the Silver Bulletin. And after the election, he had this great title, Hopium Comes at a High Price. One of his shticks over the years has been that the polls are actually fairly good. They're within a couple percent of each other, which is pretty good considering the number of people that are being polled, the number of people like me who don't answer their phone during election season, the number of people that, are pretty unreliable or aren't willing to give what they actually think is their favorite candidate for any race, really, right? And so the take-home message, I believe, from 2024 and probably 2016 as well, was that Trump polls poorly relative to the other candidates. And so polls, as it says, consistently underestimated Trump. And so on the left, we have the polling average. So if they went to, say, Michigan, where I am, right, and they looked at the polling data from around the time of the election, Kamala Harris was favored by 1.2 percentage points over Donald Trump. But then when they looked at the electoral data after the election, Trump actually won by 1.4%. And so in these 7 battleground states, as well as nationally, Trump outdid his polling data. And so this, again, is a bit of the post-mortem on the election. Regardless, I think this is a kind of cool plot, and I want to make this with you today. And so what sticks out to me? Well, first of all, this is paired data. I love paired data where you have a before and after, right? So we have before the election, after the election. And so this is what's called a dumbbell plot, or at least I call it a dumbbell plot or a barbell plot, where if you think of a barbell as having a handle, and then at the end it's got the 2 bells, right? We can think of this as being generated with something like geom segment, right? Whereas then the points could be generated using geom point. So I like that, and that sticks out to me. The other thing naturally that sticks out to me is that this is a gradient, right? And so the actual election data is in this green, whereas the polling data was white, and then the handle of the barbell has a gradient to it. I've never seen that done in R, and so I'm eager to show you how I would do that. The other thing that's interesting is that they label each of the points. It gets a little bit busy, but I think this is something we could probably do with something like geom text, where we could also change the bolding, the font face, based on which candidate we're looking at. Another thing that's interesting is on the x-axis, they have built in who is favored into their axis text, right? So the left of the 0 is favoring Harris, right is favoring Trump. They also then have these vertical grid lines with a solid grid line for the 0, where there is a toss-up, right? And one thing I noticed that's really interesting is that this Trump label here actually doesn't have the line going through it, whereas all of these other grid lines go under, I think it's under probably the label, right? And so we might need to treat this vertical line or this label a bit differently than the others. And so how we go about doing that is something to explore. And then finally, the thing I really think is pretty cool is up here on the top, they again give us a descriptor of what's going on, where the open point on the left is the pulling average margin and the right is the actual margin. All right, so this is what we're going to dig into today in this episode of Code Club. Heading over to our studio, I have transcribed the data to make a new tibble called margins. So we'll get this all loaded. I'll tell you that if you want to get the code I'm generating today, down below in the description for this episode, you'll see a link to a blog post that gives all the code that I'm generating. Also down there is a link to a newsletter, my own newsletter. It's not nearly as popular as Nate Silver's, but my newsletter doing a breakdown of how I would go about generating this figure, but doing it from a 30,000 foot view where I don't get into the nuts and bolts of the code. That's what we're going to do today. All right, so again, we have margins, and so let's look at that. We have a column with the state, the polling value, and the actual value. In my data, I have made it relative to Trump. So if it's a positive value, that's favoring Trump. If it's a negative value, it's favoring Harris. So let's go ahead and get started by making that barbell plot. We'll do margins. So when I think about how I'm going to build this out, on the y-axis, we have the state or the national result. On the x-axis, we have the favorability, or kind of who's favored in the polling data or the electoral data. And then we also have color being set by the polling or the actual. And so we need to go ahead and make margins tidy. So we'll do pivot longer, and I'll go ahead and do calls equals polling and actual. Those are the columns that I want to be longer. And so now we see that we have 3 columns, the state, the name, and the value. We could pretty this up a little bit by changing name to be type of data and value to be favorability, but we don't need to do that. So we'll go ahead then with margins, and we'll do ggplot AES. So on the x-axis, we want the value. On the y-axis, we want the state. And then our color, we want to be the name, okay? And so let's go ahead then and do geom point. So great, we now have those states. It's reordered them from what I have here, right? So it goes Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, national, right? And so it's putting it into alphabetical order. So we'll need to fix that in a bit. We'll also need to do something with the color of the points. But let's come back to that later. And we'll now do geom underscore segment. And for geom segment, we need to have a start and end position, right? So we need x and x end, y and y end to kind of cap the segment, the coordinates, right? And so actually margins here isn't going to work because I'm going to want to put polling as say x and actual as x end. And so I think what I'll do is go ahead and grab this code where I did the pivot longer to make it tidy. And I'm going to put it down here in my margins pipeline because I'm going to want to take margins as it stands and feed that into geom point. But before I do that, let's go ahead and make sure this code gives us the same result. I forgot the geom point line, so I'll get that again. There we go. So that's the same result. So now what we want to do is add the geom segment. And so we're going to basically feed margins into geom segment. So we'll do data equals margins, and then mapping is the name of the argument, AES, and x is going to be polling, x end is going to be actual, and y is going to be state. And so now it's complaining because object name not found. I'm going to go ahead and ignore this aesthetic that we had up here, and I can do that by doing inherit.aes equals false. And so now I've got my segment and my lines. That looks pretty good. I think maybe I want the point to be on top of the segment. So we'll go ahead and call geom point after geom segment. Very good. Okay, well, we have the makings of our barbell plot for recreating that Nate Silver data. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and reorder the states to be in the order that I gave it, which is the order that Nate Silver had, ultimately with national up at the top. And so we should keep in mind that when we put a categorical variable on the y-axis, down at the bottom is position 1, right? That's like y-axis 1, whereas this is like 8, right? So we've got the 7 states plus the national. And so the first value is going to be Arizona, and the last value we want to be national, which is what we have here in the state column, right? And so I'm going to make state a factor. So we'll do that. And we'll then do levels equals, and I'm basically going to do this. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and I'll do states to define that. And then we'll do states as a factor with levels equaling states. We need to close that parentheses. And so let's go ahead and try this. And so now we see Arizona at the bottom, national at the top, and we get that kind of down and to the right shift that we saw in the Nate Silver version. The national was bolded if you come back to this plot. So let's go ahead and make national bolded and everything else the same font face. I think what I will do for that is to make national have 2 stars next to it. And so that is marked down for bold. And what we could then do is make sure we've got that loaded, but we can also then do theme, and we'll do axis.text. I'll just do all the text equals element markdown. And it's telling me that it doesn't know what element markdown is because I need to do library ggtext. And so now we see that national is bolded. Great. Let's go ahead and get rid of this legend over here. And so we'll do that within geom point and geom segment. I'll do show.legend equals false. And we'll do the same thing up here for geom segment. That gives us the full view laterally of our plot, which is great. Now I'm going to get rid of those labels on the x and y axis. We'll do labs, x equals null, y equals null. Oh, and I put a comma in rather than a plus sign. That's great. Now let's go ahead and clean up the background. I'm going to use theme minimal to kind of get rid of a lot of the styling. That looks great. I'm going to get rid of the horizontal grid lines as well as the minor grid lines. So we can do that in theme. We'll do panel.grid.major.y equals element blank. And so that got rid of those horizontal grid lines. And then we also want to get rid of the minor vertical grid lines. So we'll do panel.grid.minor.x element blank. Those go away. And then we want to make those vertical grid lines perhaps thinner and dotted. So we'll do panel.grid.major.x equals element line, and we'll do line width equals 0.25, and then we'll do line type equals dotted. Oh, and it's upset with me because I put dotted. All right. So that looks pretty good. It is pretty thin. Maybe we can up that to like 0.5. Anyway, I'm going to put back to 0.25 because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself as I'm building this out, because we might want to adjust the thicknesses when we see the dimensions of the final visual. So we'll leave that as being good. We've looked at the y-axis, we've looked at the background. Let's now think about the x-axis. And so to modify that, of course, we can do scale x continuous. And looking at the limits, they go from 2 up to 5, although Trump 5.5 stands out here. So let's go from 2 up to whatever they say, right? And so we can do limits equals 2, comma, NA. And so NA lets ggplot decide what the limit should be. Oh, so we see we have 2, and we lost a whole bunch of data, right? And got a bunch of warnings. It's not 2, it is -2, although it's written as +2 here, right? So we need to be -2 because, again, everything is relative to Trump. And there, now we have -2 going out. But now we want to modify the appearance of that scale x continuous text. And so we'll do breaks equals, and we're going to go from -2 up to 5. So we'll do -2:5. And so now we see that we have all those labels in. Now we want to put in labels. And so we're going to do this as a vector. So we'll do +2. So this is actually text. So we'll put quotes around everything. And then we'll say Harris +1. There's probably a space there. 0. And then +1. And where does they put the Trump? Trump with the +1. So Trump and Harris +1. That's cool. 2 +2 +3 +4. And then they also had +5. All right. And so this is kind of getting a bit wonky. So let's go ahead and do that. And so now we see we have the x-axis titles like they had in the original plot. Now what I want to do is go ahead and save this out to a PNG file, because we're going to change the aspect ratio from what I have over here in the right to hopefully mirror what Nate Silver had in his plot. So he basically had 1100 by 800 pixels. We'll do ggsave polling bias.png, and we'll do width equals 1100, height equals 800, and then I'll do units equals px to get it to be in pixels. And there we go. And so what I'm noticing is that what we don't see over here in my plotting window on the right is that it appears that it's a white background, but it's really a transparent background, which we see here. So we need to do some work to clean up the theming, but of course we need to work on those dumbbells. Because it's going to annoy me to look at a gray background, let's go ahead and make our plot background and panel background white. So we'll do plot.background, element rect, I'll do fill equals white, and then color equals white. The fill is the interior, the color is the border. And so then that colors in our entire plot to be white. Recalling that he had a title here, polls consistently underestimated Trump. So in labs, we can go ahead and do title equals polls consistently underestimated Trump. All right. I'm forgetting to add the text components under each of the bells of the barbells. So let's go ahead and do that. You recall that under each is the name of the candidate plus however much they were favored. So to put in those names, I'm going to use geom text. And so I don't want to use margins. I want to use the tidied version of margins because I'm going to need X and Y as well as the text. So I'm going to come in here to where I had my margins and pivot longer. So let's remind ourselves what that looked like. Again, we had the state, the name, and the value. And so let's go ahead then and do mutate to add a column. I'll do pretty, and then I'll say if else value less than 0. And then if it's less than 0, it's going to be Harris plus value, right? And so then we will do Harris plus, and I'm going to then use glue to inject the value. And so we'll do value. And this is actually going to be the absolute value of value. All right. And so then if it's greater than 0, then it's going to be Trump plus that value. Okay. And so let's put these results on their own lines. And I need to bring in glue. So we'll go ahead and do library glue. I actually need to call glue. So I'll do that glue here and there, and then glue here as well. Probably could have put glue around the entire if-else statement, but I think this will do. And I'm somehow shorting mutate a parenthesis. Okay, there we go. And so now what we see is that we have the Trump, Harris, Harris, Harris. So I just want to check that Harris plus 1 wasn't Harris plus 1.0, right? So they don't have the trailing zeros. Okay, so let's go ahead and pipe this into everything else. And in here then, we'll go ahead and do label equals pretty. And let's go ahead with geom point, I'll go ahead and do geom text. All right, so this looks horrible, right? So we'll need to get rid of that name, and we'll need to make our font actually is black, and it needs to be brought down a bit below the point. So let's go ahead then, and for geom text, we'll do color equals black, and then show.legend equals false. With all these show legend equals falses, there is actually a theme argument where I could do something with like something about the legend and basically saying don't show any legends, but I like having this control over each component a little bit better than doing it in theme. Okay, so of course we got rid of the legend, and now we need to shrink our font a bit. So let's come back up to geom text, and we'll go ahead and then do size equals, I'm going to try 6, and we'll do size.unit to be point. So I think that's a decent size font. We now want to move down the Y aesthetic. And so in here, we can do AES, Y equals Y minus, let's do like 0.25. And I need a parenthesis here. And it's not happy about my Y, and I think it should actually be state minus 0.25. So it's not happy with me using state. So around state up here, I think what I'll do is as.numeric. All right, so that looks good. I think we could probably move it down just a smidge more and perhaps make the text a little bit smaller. I'm noticing here with the Trump +1, Trump plus 2.2. And you know what? I think relatively speaking, their text is a bit smaller than what I'm using. So let's go ahead and drop the size down to 5. And let's bring this down to say 0.33. That looks pretty good. We're still losing the Trump 5.5 out here. So let's go ahead and have our limit maybe go out to 6. I currently have NA because I was going to let it use the expand to kind of plug in whatever it wanted out to the right. So we'll go ahead and do limit to 6. And then I'll also go ahead and turn off that expand. So we'll do expand equals C 0, 0. Better, but we're still losing part of that 5.5. So let's go up to say 6.25. So now we have the major components on the plot where you don't have the legend up here at the top yet, but we'll get there. Let's go ahead and thicken our dumbbell line and then probably make those points a little bit bigger and then try to match the color scheme that Nate Silver used in his version. I'm noticing that he has a different colored outside to inside. And so let's go ahead and do that with plotting symbol 21. And so we'll do shape equals 21. Again, that gives us what appears to be open circles, but the color aesthetic controls the border, whereas the fill controls the interior. And so we'll go ahead and do fill equals name. And we'll also do color equals name now that I think about it, because I think those border colors are different for the two polling versus actual. Okay, and now it looks like it's filled. So now to modify that, we need to go ahead and do scale color manual, and we'll do breaks. And again, the break is on name, right? Which was either polling or actual. And so we'll do polling and actual, and then our values is going to be, so the polling is a light gray and the actual is a dark gray. So we'll do light gray, dark gray. Okay, that's kind of hard to see. I think the points are ultimately going to be a bit bigger. So let's go ahead and take our size up to 3. I think that's probably a good size. So the polling fill will be white and the polling fill will be kind of this greenish color. Basically copy what we have for scale color manual down, and we'll then do scale fill manual. And then, so our breaks, and so we said white. Using my digital color meter, I'll go ahead and grab that green color right in the middle there. And then I'll go ahead and plop that in place of the lime green. And there we go. I think that's a good color. So looking at his versus mine, I think the plotting symbol is a little bit smaller. So let's go ahead and bring that down just a smidge. I have 3. If we do 2, I think that's pretty close in size. Now let's think about that dumbbell. So we could increase the geom segment, and we could do like line width equals 2 to match the point. I wonder if the line width and the point size are related to each other. So it could be a little bit wider. So let's go ahead and take our geom segment and maybe make it 2.25. We could probably take it up to 2.5. I think that looks pretty good. So now we have a black segment. What we really want is this nice gradient that Silver had on his, right? And so I was thinking we might do this with some of the new features in ggplot that I talked about a couple episodes back, when I was putting patterns in our bar plots. But it turns out we can't actually do that with a line plot with like a segment like this. So we're going to use a different tool, which is called ggforce. So we'll do library ggforce. ggforce is a new package to me. Maybe I've used it in the past without really knowing it, but ggforce is developed by Thomas Lynn Peterson, who's also developed Patchwork as well as ggAnimate. And basically, he's expanding beyond ggplot2, saying it'd be really nice if ggplot2 had these extra geomes and these extra features, but it doesn't, so we'll put it into ggforce. And so if you come to the reference page for ggforce, there is a section on different types of geomes for building lines. And the one that I'm going to be interested in is geom link. And so geom link links points with paths. Geom link is a surrogate for geom segment that allows you to then put a gradient across that segment. Basically, geom segment, right, has 2 points, like a x and x end, y end. Geom link will then interpolate values between those 2 points that you can then assign to a gradient of colors. And so we'll do that then by plopping in, instead of geom segment, let's go ahead and do geom link. I think this should just work the way it is. So it's asking for y end, which is fine. It's the same as y. So we'll do y end equals state. And let's go ahead and put these on another line. So that works. We have basically the same thing that we had before. And now what we want to do is assign the color to vary across the length of that point. And so we have scale color manual and scale fill manual. The fill is really the color we want for that gradient. And so unfortunately we have fill and color to manipulate colors. I think what maybe I'll start by doing is changing my geom point to have a color of dark gray. So this gives us a dark gray stroke around our symbols. Again, that doesn't totally work for the polling average margin, but we'll worry about that later. So let's get the gradient on the line. And so I'm going to go ahead and comment out my scale color manual and put in scale color gradient. And we'll have a low value, which is going to be, I believe it was light gray, and a high value, which is going to be this green color. Then I'll go ahead and copy the hexadecimal up. So that didn't do anything, and I think I know why. Because in geom link, I had probably color equals black. It didn't work because I haven't told it how to interpolate the color. So I forgot that within mapping, I need to map the position along the segment back to the color, right? And so then we'll do color equals, and in here then I'll put index. And so index is the value along each segment. And so it's not liking my use of index there. This again is a new function to me. So I'm gonna come down and look at their examples and see how they did all this, right? So they're using stat index. Let's go ahead and use stat, or after stat it appears, instead of just straight up index. And so again, we'll come back up here to geom link and we'll do stat index. And it's wanting me to use after stat index because stat has been deprecated. So we'll do after stat. So this is looking a bit pixelated. And I'm remembering that there's an argument called n. So let's go ahead and put n in our geom link. So I'll go ahead and put this color on a separate line. And then I'll go ahead and do n equals 1,000. And I think that looks a lot better in dealing with that pixelation. So I'm pretty happy with the way my barbell appears relative to theirs. One thing I'm noticing is that they actually do have a bit of an edge on their handle, which I really could care less about, to be honest. Also, I'm noticing their point is a little bit wider than their barbell, and that the stroke is a bit thinner. So let's go ahead and reduce the stroke, and maybe that'll make it look a little bit cleaner. So we can come back up to geom point, and we can do stroke equals 0.25. And so that stroke is the thickness of the border. And I think that looks pretty good. I am noticing though, if I look really closely here, that the barbell, that the handle is a bit wider than the circle. So let's go ahead and make the circle a smidge larger. And again, let's go make the size 2.5. And yeah, I think that looks really nice. Now I want to go ahead and put in our V line at 0. And so we'll do that with the geom V line. And so that's going to go behind all the data. So I want that to be the first thing. So we'll do geom V line, and we'll do x-intercept equals 0. So that's a pretty thick line. Let's go ahead and make it a bit thinner, and we'll do line width 0.25, and I need to spell line width correctly. That looks pretty good. So I'm noticing that I can see the vertical V line behind the gradient, and I wonder if there's an alpha in geom link. So let's go ahead and do alpha equals 1. So unfortunately that doesn't help. I think what I could do maybe is add a white block over the line here, where it crosses with the state, as well as do the same thing for my trump label here. And so that'll kind of be a solution that's a bit of a kludge, but will help clean that up a little bit also for that label. And so again, this is position 8, 7, 6. And so let's come back up, and we'll do that after geom V line. We'll do annotate, and I'll do a segment as my geom. So our Y position is going to be 6, 7, and 8, and our X is going to be what? And so that's right at 0, right? So let's do like negative 0.25. That's probably all we need to do, right? 0.25. Everything will be at 0.25, starting and ending at 0.25. And then let's make the color, for now, I'm going to make it red, so it's obvious to see, and then later we'll change it to be white. It's unhappy because I think I've screwed up something with a comma. Yes, I put a comma again instead of a plus. I don't know why I'm doing that today. And it appears to be unhappy that I gave it these numbers when the y-axis is a categorical or discrete scale. All right, so let's go ahead and put in the actual names, right? So that would be the Wisconsin, Michigan, and National. And we'll come down here to, instead of this vector, I'm going to put in a different vector, which will be those state names as well as the national. And let's see if that helps. Very cool. So I learned something, that because the y-axis is discrete, then anytime we kind of reference to that discrete variable, we need to refer to that discrete variable. I am a bit worried though about this trump. And what we had previously did for moving the labels was to make it numeric. And so I wonder if when we come back here, if what happens if we do like as.numeric on those states? Do we get an error? Yeah, we are getting that error. Okay, well, we'll worry about that here in a minute. So we'll leave that as our factor, and we need to put in a line width that matches what we're using with our geom link. And so that's 2.5. Good, so that's the same thickness. Now I want to turn that to be white instead of red. And so we'll do white, and voila, that looks pretty good. We no longer have that X line going through our barbell handle. Great. Now we need to worry about this trump, which is in Pennsylvania. And so I could do the same type of thing, but with Pennsylvania, but I don't want it to be at Pennsylvania. I want it to be down from Pennsylvania. I'm going to add another annotate, and let's put in Pennsylvania. And again, I'll put this back to being red. But we want that red block to be down behind the trump text so we don't see the black line, right? And so, but if I do that minus 0.25, I get an error because non-numeric argument to binary operator. So I'm not really sure what to do here. I guess the other approach that I could take would be, instead of making my y-axis discrete, would be to make my y-axis continuous, and like we did for the x-axis, to put custom labels on the x-axis. Let's try that. So I think what I'll do is go ahead and make an index for the state. And so let's go ahead then and do state index equals as.numeric on state. Okay, and so then if we look at margins, we now see that we have the state index, and we can use state index. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste state index, And I'm going to use that for my y. Let's put this on a separate line. Here I have y equals these three states. And so this is 6, 7, and 8. So 6 through 8. And then down here for the geom link, the y is going to be state index. And then the y end is going to be state index. And then here, instead of this as numeric, we can do state index minus 0.33. And I think that should work. So no error messages, but now we need to put in our scale y continuous, right? And so we'll do that up here, scale y continuous, and our breaks will be 1 to 8, and our labels are going to be states. Is that what I had up here? States, right? Good. So now we can go ahead and run all this. And I think I forgot a plus sign somewhere where I was putting this in with the scale y continuous. And there we go. We now have our state names back. But what are we getting? We're getting these horizontal grid lines back, which is not what I want. Maybe those are minor breaks, right? So I'll do scale panel. So I'll do panel grid minor and remove that .x to remove all of those minor breaks. And maybe I'll put that up so that my major panel grid lines are together. So what are we doing, right? We have converted from using state as a factor to being a special label on the y-axis. Now what we want to do is go back and put a white line behind Trump on Pennsylvania, which is number 5, right? And so then let's come back up here where we had geom, where we had annotate, and we'll uncomment that. And again, this is going to be 5 minus 0.25. That gets us our red rectangle almost behind Trump, but we want to go down a little bit further. And I should have just used 0.33 because that's what we had used to move down the label, right? And so we can do that here as well, 0.33. And that is nicely right behind Trump. Now I can turn that red to be white. And so now I have the nice padding around Trump for Georgia or for Pennsylvania as it crosses over the 0. I think this looks pretty good for the body of the figure. Now I want to go about cleaning up the titles for the plot, the labels, the text on the y-axis and the x-axis, and then we ultimately need to put in that legend across the top. So for that title, we're going to make it left justified on the plot. So we'll do plot.title.position, and we'll do plot. And so that, again, left justifies it. We're going to want to then modify the plot title. We'll do plot title equals element text. We'll do face equals bold, and then size equals 12. So I'm looking at his, and his goes from basically the left side of the plot to just beyond Trump +1. And so mine goes quite a bit further over. So there's going to be some moving back and forth, and it appears that the y-axis titles are a little bit smaller than the title. In here, I'll go ahead and modify both of those at the same time. So I had axis text element markdown. Let me bring that down, and then we'll have .x and .y, and let's make the size of that, let's do 8, and then let's make this 10. So they both could get a bit smaller, so let's do 8 and 6. And let's take that down to 6 and 5. And I think that's pretty close. Maybe the title could go up to 7. And let's make those titles 6. And I think that looks pretty decent. The font on the y-axis titles and the x are actually a grayish color. And so I'm going to go ahead and make this color equals black. So one thing I notice is that his is left justified, whereas mine is right justified. That's easy enough to change. We'll do hjust equals 0. Great. Now let's turn our attention to the x-axis. And so that's down here. And let's start with size equals 5 and do color equals black. So it looks about the perfect size. Our fonts are a little bit different. One thing I forgot is that the actual margin is bolded, whereas ours is a plain font. Let's go ahead and use Markdown, and then we can modify geom text to be a text box, I believe. Let's go ahead and look at what the tibble looks like at this point. Right, so we have state, index, name, value, pretty. And so then what we can do is within this same mutate, I can take pretty and I can say if else, I need equal sign, if else name equals actual, then I'm going to do glue and we're going to put 2 stars around pretty on both sides to make it bold. And then otherwise it's going to be pretty. Now we see that our actual data has the stars around it, but we need to convert that to geom text box. And it's upset about my size unit, and I might be using the wrong geom. So let's try geom text box. And it didn't like that I had the size unit. So let's get rid of that. And then let's make the size equal 1. All right, so that's not what we want. So geom text box is putting a background on. And we can turn that off, I think, by doing like fill equals NA. And I missed my comma here. So that removed the fill from the background. And then I believe if we do geom text box, there is a box color. So let's go ahead and turn that off. And so again, back up here with geom text box. Next to the fill, we'll do box color equals NA. And I believe the fill is the fill background, right? I don't know if there's a, yeah, the fill was that. Okay, so I'm using the right argument. Okay, and then box color equals NA. This is still like left justified on a really big label. So there's H aligned, so horizontal alignment of the text inside the box. I don't really want the box though. And I wonder what is changing the size of the box. So let's see. So there's width and height. So if height equals null, the height is chosen to accommodate all the text. So let's do width equals null and see if that brings it in. So we'll go ahead and do width equals null. Much better. Now we want that font to be a little bit larger. And so let's come back up to geom text box, and we had size as 1. Let's do 2. I think that's actually pretty decent. Maybe it's a little bit too large. It gets a little bit jumbled here with Georgia. I'm going to take it down to maybe like 1.75, and we'll call that good. So I think that looks good. So I know this video is getting long, but there's one last thing I need to do. And if you look back at this, we see that there's an annotation up at the top here showing that the left is the polling average mean and the right is the actual mean, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. We're kind of packing all sorts of value in here, aren't we? So I will do that with an annotate statement. And so annotate, and I'm going to start with a point because I want to get my sense of where I am in all this. And so the X I'm going to make to be Harris's +1. So that's -1. So X is going to be -1. And my Y is going to be, let's make it 8.5 because national is 8. And we want to go just above that. I'm also noticing looking at this that the grid line on the top goes beyond national on mine, but not on theirs. So we'll put a pin on that for right now and come back to that. And I think I screwed something up. And I, of course, forgot the plus sign here, and I misspelled annotate. I'm getting tired. So we will go ahead and solve that problem with the expanding lines here, because the problem there is that it's doing the expand. And so let's go ahead and have, on the y-axis, we want that to be set with chord Cartesian. So we'll do chord Cartesian, and the clip is the problem, right? So we'll do clip equals off, and then with scale y continuous, we'll do expand equals c0, 0, and we get our plus sign here. Now it's tighter, but it's drawing the grid line up to my point, which isn't really what I want it to do. Why has this got to be so hard? Let's go ahead and worry about the legend, and then we'll come back and worry about the grid lines later. I have an idea for what might fix that. Again, looking at his, it's just above the point. So it's now going to the point, and not beyond the point. Why is it so hard? I have ways to, I have an idea for dealing with this, but we'll come back to that in a bit. So let's go ahead then, change that point to a segment, and we'll come back up to where I did annotate, and instead of point, we'll do segment. And so then x is going to be -1, and x end is going to be -1, and then my y is going to be 8.5, and my y end, let's make that 8.25. So we get that line, but it's thicker than what he has. So we can go ahead and change that down to be thinner. So we'll do line width equals, and what did we use on the V line? Let's do that, 0.25. That looks pretty good. Maybe ours is a little bit too long. So I'm gonna go ahead and change that. It'll make this 8.4. I think that's good. Now we wanna do the same thing, but on the other side. So I'm gonna come back up to this annotate, and we'll make it a vector. So we'll go -1 to 1 and 1, not 2, 1, but all right. And so that should work. So that worked, but I don't think we want it at 1. I think we want it at 1.5. So that's easy enough to change. If we come back up here and make the x and x end 1.5, and I see I'm going off the right side of the screen here, so let's clean that up. Great, now we have those 2 tick marks, and now we want to put in the text. So we'll do pulling average margin, actual margin. And that again will be another annotate, and we'll go ahead and do annotate. Oh, I misspelled annotate again. All right, and so then that's going to be a text. X, I'm going to make -1 and 1.5. And my Y, I'm going to make 8.5. And my label, he had pulling average margin and actual margin. So we'll have pulling average margin and actual margin. And those were all caps. And I feel like they were bolded. So let's do font face equals bold. Of course, that's ginormous. His is about the same size, maybe a little bit smaller than the text he used in that we used in like that geom text box. So we can go ahead and shrink that down. Our geom text box size was 1.75. Let's make ours 1.25. So size equals 1.25. And it could probably be a little bit bigger. So let's go ahead and up that. I think I had 1.75 in the text box. So let's go ahead and make it 1.5. I think that looks like a good size, but they're centered. We want them to be right justified for the first and left justified for the second. And I think we can vectorize HJust. So we'll come back up to annotate, and then we'll do HJust equals C. So again, 1 for the right justify and 0 for the left justify. So that looks pretty good, although I noticed that my A and my N aren't quite over where I want it to be, which is very odd. So I'm going to go ahead and bring over the left one ever so slightly. Here on my text, let's do 1.05 and then 1.45. Oh, and so I got the right one correct, but the left one, I moved the wrong direction, of course. Nothing's easy. Let's see, I had this at -1, so this should be -0.95. And that looks much better. All right, the final thing that's just gonna annoy me is that my line and grid lines are going beyond the data, whereas in his, they stop at the top of national, okay? I realize this is a very small point, but it annoys me and I want it to be right. I'm gonna turn off the grid line, so we'll do element blank on those major X grid lines. I'm gonna grab this element line. So I'll put it up here with the geom V line, but I'm not gonna use geom V line. I'm gonna use geom segment. And actually, I'm gonna do an annotate. And this is getting to be a lot of annotates, but hey, it works, and I'm thrilled it works. So we'll again do segment. Our X's will go from -2 to 5, and our X end is going to go from -2 to 5. And then our Y is going to go from 0, is going to start at 0, and our Y end is going to be 8. So this should get us solid black lines, every value across the x-axis. So this causes a problem because this puts it at 0 on the x-axis. So let's come back up to our segments. Let's do 0.75 and our end go to 8.25. And so our lines need to come down a little bit because they need to go below the Trump label for Arizona. So we'll do that very quickly here. Let's go down to 0.5. So I think that's good on the bottom. On the top, it could come down. So I had that go up to 8.25. Let's take this up to say 8.05. And it can go up a little bit more. Let's do 8.1. And now we want to change our line types. When we had the thinner line, you couldn't see it behind the gradient. So let's go ahead and make the line thickness 0.25, line width of 0.25, and then line type equals dotted. And we want that line to be gray. We'll do color equals gray. So I think that does a pretty good job of making it more muted. Of course, now we need our zero line to be a solid black line. And let's come back here. I think it's going to be easier to add another segment line. And so my X I'll make 0, and my Y end will make 0. And then our color will be black, and our line type I'll make solid. There we go. I'm going to call it. I think that's pretty good. I think I've done a pretty nice job of replicating Nate Silver's original figure. Let me know what you think. There's a few things that stick out to me that are a little bit different. One being the color of the ring around the point for the actual margin. I don't really care. I think I did a good job of matching the coloring at the pulling average margin side of the barbell. But the one thing I'm missing on the right side is the color of that ring. I'm not gonna sweat it too much. Let me know what you think, if you think I'm a sellout or not. I do have a way that I think I could add it, and that would be to add another geom point layer to this with a darker color. This video is getting way too long already, and so I'm gonna hold off on doing that. If you wanna do it, go ahead and then check the code that I post, because I know myself and I'm not gonna be able to stop myself from going in and trying to replicate the color for the border of that point. The other thing that he does that I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything with is that he has an edge for the handle of the barbell. Whatever. That's just more than what I can do, and I think that's just a subtle difference between the software he's using and the software I'm using. Let me know what you think of this visual. Let me know what you think of this idea of having the gradient. Again, we were able to do the gradient using the geom link from the ggforce package. ggforce has a number of other great geoms in it with like things to make ellipses, arcs, splines, all sorts of different crazy things that I think will really add a lot of fun to your ggplot2 experience. Let me know what you think about this. I have some ideas for how I would remake this data into a different visual, and that will be shared in the next episode of Code Club. So that you don't miss that episode, please make sure that you've subscribed, and we'll see you next time.